Good morning, sunshine. How's everybody? Today we're going to talk about research. Again, we talked about the 7 steps in the process of doing a show a couple of months ago, but just to remind you, your first step is commitment. And so you're in the class, and so you're committed to doing this thing. The next step is analysis, which we've gone through with your plays. You've gone through and figured out things you know, things you don't know, just read the plays, gotten the analysis part of it done as to what the characters' involvement are and who they are and what they want, all that sort of stuff. And now it's time to do the research, which again is answering the questions that you had from your analysis phase, but also beginning to developing a concept for your production. Again, just to remind you, we talked about this many times, but the difference between style, the way the play was initially done, and concept, the way you're going to do the play, can be very minimal or it can be very different. In other words, you could do a Shakespearean play and set in the Wild Wild West. Of course, the Wild Wild West didn't occur for 300 years after Shakespeare died, and so Shakespeare had no idea what the Wild Wild It could have a better, deeper, more meaningful impact if you do something like that, or maybe not. Yes. So this is part of the time when you start thinking about those connections, start developing that concept, and start developing your approach to the play. Yes, that's the purpose for doing your research. First of all, the reason you have to do research is it is very difficult to conjure things that you are not familiar with on some level. And so really what you're looking for is answers. You're looking for possibilities. And again, the range of possibilities can be just things you happen to come across on some random television show, may spark an idea after you've read the play. It's much better to have a concise formula, or at least a way of approach to doing your research, so it's a little less haphazard, yes? But don't put the haphazard by the wayside. Sometimes the best ideas come from the middle of the night having crazy dreams, or crazy conversations at the bar. Yes, you can develop some great ways of approaching plays or doing the theater. Again, I'm going to set this down into several steps just to make it easier for you to remember. Pretty much from the most practical steps to the most outrageous steps, in the sense that they're flamboyant, they're out there, they're just esoteric, they're just thought processes and thought ideas and that sort of stuff, approaches to research. But the only way to develop concepts is to think about things, and the best way to think about things is to know stuff. So what you want to do is first start by being honest, and as you've gone through the script, you need to say, do I really know what this phrase means? Do I really know how this is being used? Again, if you're doing A Doll's House, what do you know about being a housewife in Norway in 1870? My suggestion is not much. So the fact that you can relate to much of the story may mean that you don't know exactly what a macaroon is. Is a macaroon with chocolate covering in Norway in 1870 the same thing that a macaroon today would be that you get from Walmart? And maybe, or maybe not, I don't know. That takes a little research, yes? So just because you may be familiar with it, it's always better to do the little research and confirm that indeed, or maybe not, find the differences. Now, having said that, one of the things about research, there's always the audience that's watching it will probably know as much about the period and style of the play as you do right now anyway, if you are typical of your audiences, yes? And so a lot of times you may find out information which is nice to know, but can be, difficult to get through in a 2-hour play. So sometimes research can go over the top, yes? But again, it's always better to base your choices on knowledge than happenstance, yes? So the first thing is just come up with terms. For instance, in Death of a Salesman, we're going to talk a little bit more about in a second bit, there's a little thing called a wire recorder in the office. What in the world is a wire recorder? How does it work? Can you change it to a tape recorder? Can you change it to a cassette recorder? And how does that change the period? Has that have an impact on the show? Yes, just doing practical research, finding out how that works. If there's one available, can you get one on eBay or order one, or go to the local thrift store, that sort of stuff? Are they readily available? Is there some place you can borrow one? Yes, so simple things like that. Terms can often be very important to exposing the meaning of plays. Now sometimes terms are just terms. For instance, in Krapp's last tape, he talks about viduity, Viduity. My guess is you don't know what viduity means. And the reason I say that is because it has to do with being a person whose spouse has passed. Yes, being a widow or a widower. Just the emotional state of having a loss. Yes, or something that has lost, your meaning in life has been lost to you. Yes, that's a person who has viduity. Yes, and so that's, if you get down to it, if you know Krapp's last tape, that is sort of the situation that he's in. Does that mean that he is a widow? The rest of the play doesn't really hint at a wife. It hints at girlfriends, but it could just be simply the sense of loss that he's going through about his own life, as opposed to that of a wife. Yes, but those are decisions you have. Once you find the answers to the questions, you can then wrestle with. Why is this term being used? Who uses that word? What does that say about the character, that the character knows that word? One of my favorite words is a word called pedantic. Again, my guess is you don't know what a pedantic is, nor what a pedant is. But a person who is pedantic, it's P-E-D-A-N-T-I-C, pedantic. It is a person, it means a person who uses words that most people don't use in their conversations to try and make them feel inferior. That's what a pedant does. They use outrageous terms that nobody in their right mind would ever know in order to make the person they're talking to feel less. Now, the fun thing about the word pedantic, a person who uses the word pedantic is being pedantic. It's self-defining, yes? So, I love that word. For instance, Count on High Tin Roof, the word mendacity. Where else in the world have I ever heard the word mendacity? And yet, it is insightful into Big Daddy's character. Mendacity means not just a person who lies, but a person who revels in lying, who enjoys lying, who gets off on lying, who lies to make your life more miserable. And the thing about Big Daddy is he's had to deal with people who've lied to him and lied about things to him his whole life, and he can't stand mendacity. He can't stand liars and the liars who tell him, lies and the liars who tell him. And of course, one of the things that Brick is going through is he has the word of mouth out there is that he and his best friend, who has killed himself, somehow had a homosexual relationship, which Brick is in denial about. And the people who, so Big Daddy is mad at the liars who spread the lies about them having a relationship, but he's also upset with Brick and his wife, Kat, for not being able to come to grips with one another and face the truth. Yes? So mendacity becomes a very important word to understand, because if you don't understand the word, how are you going to understand the motivation of the character, right? Now, I'm not saying every word in every play can get you to that kind of through line, but you need to assume that the reason the words are there is because they have that type of importance. Authors just don't pick random words out of the air to put in most plays, yes? There's a reason why characters say words and use words, and it tells you a lot about their education, about who they are, about their background, where they came from, yes? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Sometimes it'll tell you things about the environment that you're in. For instance, there's a play called And Then There Were None, where they come to this island and there's a big storm going on and this raging sea and all this mess. And about the middle of this first act, a person looks out and says the sky is a very mackerel sky. Now, if you don't know what a mackerel sky is, Cody will show you a little picture of a mackerel sky here. It's sort of billowy white clouds. And it's the way, if you've ever looked at the sky after a big storm, it's the way the clouds look as they're leaving. So what's happening is when he says the sky is very mackerel, that means that at least the storm on the outside of the building is going away, and we're about to have the storm on the inside of the building. But that's, again, it should clue in your set designer, your lighting designer, as to how to approach the play from then on as far as the climate is concerned. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the way you approach the play, the way the characters are concerned. But again, you need to go through the play, notice things that you don't know what they mean, phrases, things that people talk about. Again, in the South, bless your heart doesn't necessarily mean bless your heart. And we know that in the South. In the North, I think we're saying bless your heart. But we're not. Yes? So, find out what you're talking about. The next step, again, if this has not been a part of your analysis phase, you need to go through and find out what you need to know about the space itself. Where are you going to perform this play? Before you start making choices about how you're going to perform it, you need to know where you're going to perform it and any kind of special needs the space has. For instance, just to give you a couple of local examples, the Wetumpka Depot was built inside of an old, I think, Piggly Wiggly or A&P or something like that. Anyway, there is a support post downstage center. Downstage, the most powerful position to act in most stages, there's a 6-inch pipe stuck in the ground going straight to the roof. Can't be moved. So if you're doing a play at the Wetumpka Depot, you have to count on the fact that half the audience is looking around the pole this way, and half the audience is looking down the pole that way, and probably the worst place to stand on the stage of the Wetumpka Depot is downstage center. Yes, in most places that would be the most powerful place. At Wetumpka Depot, not so much. You can't be seen by most everybody because you're hidden by a pole. Did I mention there's a pole there? Yes. Now, for instance, the Cloverdale Playhouse, one of the things you need to know about it, there's no stage left. Stage right, you can get to the dressing rooms and that sort of stuff. There's some offstage space upstage for the Playhouse. But stage left, it's called a wall. It's the end of the building. Yes? So as you're thinking about how you're going to do the performance, entrances, storage, any kind of set change that you need to have has to come from stage right because there is no stage left. Yes? So before you start making choices, find out the limitations of the space because they will impact the play. You can't just suddenly add a wing stage left at the Cloverdale Playhouse. You can't knock a pole down that supports the roof at the Wetumpka Depot. Now, the larger the theater is, the more it has been built for that specific purpose, the less you're going to run into those kind of annoyances. But even at the Davis Theater, stage right, there's the fly rail, which is about 10 feet off the floor, and it sticks out a good 8 feet. So that even though you have 15 feet of offstage wing space, if something is taller than 10 feet, it hits the fly rail. Yes? So again, sometimes you miss things in drawings. Go to the space if you can, determine what you can, what things are in the way. Believe it or not, there's a theater in Phoenix City that I worked at, the Liberty Theater, I think it's actually in Columbus, but they decided when the air conditioning people came in, they decided to put the air conditioning duct right in the middle of the fly house because there's this big wide open space with this air conditioning duct. And so they can fly things about 4 feet. That's how far the pipe travels before it hits an air conditioning duct. Even though it has like 20 fly lines, you're thinking, oh, we'll fly it. No, you're not. You can hang stuff there, but you're not flying it more than 4 feet because you run into an air conditioning duct. And of course, it costs money to replace air conditioning duct, and somebody should have been there, yes, to stop them, but nobody was. So again, discover things about the space. The next thing you need to know is budgets. How much time? There are 3 things you need to know that you can budget. You can budget time. Again, you need to be very good at making a calendar, and always you have to know yourself and how well you hit a deadline. If you're somebody who hits the alarm clock snooze button 3 times, give yourself 3 days before it's due. If you're somebody who hits the alarm clock 5 times, give yourself 5 days before it's due. If you're somebody who wakes up immediately when the alarm clock goes on, give yourself 1 day before it's due, just as a little leeway. Whatever the time that you have to have your drawings in, your designs in, we have auditions, have everything prepared prior to that time because opening night don't move. I say that, but then we're in the middle of a pandemic and it has moved. But usually opening night is opening night. So you have to have things ready to go by then. It's usually best to have them go as soon as possible so that anything you haven't anticipated can be dealt with quickly and easily and not throw the wrench into everything else that's going on, yes? So time is something you can budget. Money, obviously, is something you can budget, and money will actually tell you a lot of things about what the expectations of the performance are. If you're doing a show that's got $1,000 budget for everything, sound, lights, anything you buy, you got to spend $1,000 on. There's a different expectation than if you're doing a show that you have a $10,000 budget for, or a $100,000 budget for. Yes, if you have a $100,000 budget from a theater, and you spend $1,000 of it, you save them $99,000. Now, are they happy? My guess is probably not, because there's a reason they budgeted $100,000. They're charging people $500 a ticket to come see their show. And if you spent only twice that on the whole show, you might be lucky. It may be miraculous. Could be the most incredible $1,000 anybody ever spent in their whole life. Yes, and if Denzel Washington's in it, who cares, right? But for the most part, the budget will tell you the type of production the theater is expecting. And in my experience, they want you to spend that money or they wouldn't have told you the budget number. Now, for me personally, if the budget is $2,000, I'll take my budget at 80%. So I'll make my budget $1,600. Why? Because there's always things that are last minute expenses. And if you spent the $2,000 that it was originally budgeted for, you don't have anything to pay for those last minute things. And because they're last minute, things like overnight shipping just cost more. You find that the answers that you can find are just more expensive when you only have a day to solve the problem as opposed to a month to solve the problem. Yes? So I would take 80% of your budget, whatever the budget figure is, money-wise, and use that as your budget figure and shoot for that. Yes? The other thing you can budget is the people. You're going to find out very quickly in a lot of situations you're going to work in, it's volunteer people. How many people can you get? Well, if you're doing a show and you need a spotlight operator and a fly operator and a deck crew and a costume, a wardrobe change person and a stage manager and a light board operator and a soundboard operator, you can get up to 10 people very quickly on any crew without trying. Yes? Now, if you're working in a community theater where you have 2 volunteers, guess what? Some of those jobs are being combined. You've got a stage manager who's also who's also running the light board, right? You have a deck crew that is also the fly crew that also may run back there and just run a spotlight for some reason. Yes, you may have actors who have to do some of these things, yes? And so again, a lot of your choices as to how you're gonna do the show will be dependent upon the number of crew members, the number of people that you can have to work with you or for you, yes? Because again, if you have 8 people a day for 8 hours a day, then you've got 2 weeks to do the show, that's a certain number of man hours. If it's you and one other person, even if you have 5 weeks, that's not as many hours as 8 people, 8 hours a day for 2 weeks. So again, you have to plan carefully because it's the worst thing you can do is make these huge exotic plans and then have it fall short. Yes, it's better to plan short than to fall short. Cool? All right, so those can be a part though of your building your analysis. When you're deciding whether to do the show or not, you might know some of that information because again, if you don't know if they're going to pay you $10,000 to do the show as a designer or as a director, but they're only giving you a $1,000 budget for your costumes, etc., somehow their priorities may be a little mixed. Yes, but if somebody's going to pay me $10,000, I don't care what their priorities are. I'm going to say yes, do it and do the best I can. Yes. All right, let's start talking about how to develop a production concept. And the first thing to do in developing a production concept is don't reinvent the wheel. Find out how everybody else did it. Unless it's an original production. For instance, we're doing a show called Shadows of the Sun, which no one else has ever done. So there's no original productions to look at. But there are shows that are similar. It's a Greek style performance piece, and people have done Greek plays for 2,500 years. So even though they haven't done a show particularly like the show you're doing, find a show that's close or similar to the type of show you're doing and see how they solve some of the problems, yes? Again, it may be that you come up with a unique solution and then you're gonna win an award for it, and that's great. But still, it is nice to have at least gone through the solutions, because especially if it's been done before, somebody else just had to try to figure out how to put the gas mask on the dentist in Little Shop of Horrors and let him to sing his song. The problem is you put him in a gas mask and then he has to sing this song that we, the audience, can hear but he's got a gas mask on that he has to asphyxiate in. Yes? And so somebody's had to face this problem, and probably somewhere somebody's will be glad to rent you, loan you, sell you their solution to that problem. Yes, really interesting problems. People will be glad. People know when they have an interesting problem, like it's Sweeney Todd with the blade that cuts people's throats. The person who developed that has sold the rights to Roscoe, and Roscoe sells a knife now, a razor that cuts your throat. I mean, it doesn't really cut your throat. It just acts like you're cutting your throat. Yes, but you can first of all look at historical productions. You can also look at the historical biography of the playwright. You can figure out why the playwright wrote this play. What about the playwright's life caused them or inspired them to write this play? A lot of times finding out where it fits in the series of plays the playwright may have written may give you a clue as to why they wrote the play. For instance, in the case of Death of a Salesman, Arthur Miller had written a play that's very similar to it, but he was dissatisfied with the way it worked, and so he rewrote the play and came up with Death of a Salesman, which won the Pulitzer Prize. Yes, and so sometimes that may be the answer as to why the play wound up being the way it is. Sometimes it's just to get away from. Marcia Norman wrote a whole series of plays that were just about women's prisons and very serious subject matter. And then she wrote Secret Garden because she just wanted to write something and breathe and be happy for a little while. I'm just gonna write this little musical. Sure, it's about a kid stuck in a wheelchair, making up all these characters, but at least it's a little bit more lighthearted than the Night Mother. Lord help us all. You might want to find out what kind of theatrical conventions, especially if it's a historical play like Shakespeare or a Moliere play. A lot of times the way that the play is written is dependent upon how the play was staged originally. So for instance, the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare had a balcony in his environment that he used quite often in plays. And so knowing that will help you to discern at least why it was written the way it was written. Now, does that mean you have to have a balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet? Well, you know what? It's Romeo and Juliet, people are going to expect a balcony scene. But in some of Shakespeare's plays that have balconies in them, my guess is the fact that it's in a balcony may not be that important because people don't know them as well. But again, a lot of times you're going with the expectation of what the audience expects. In Singing in the Rain, for instance, the song Singing in the Rain has nothing to do with the plot. The guy's just dropped her off at her house and he's just happy and he's singing in the rain. It's this huge technical part of the show. It has to rain, by the way. Yes. It ends the first act, right? So does it have to rain? Well, it's Singing in the Rain. If you don't make it rain, that's what the audience is paying to see. If Peter Pan, you did Peter Pan without people flying, that's what the audience came to see, people flying. Yes? So you got to know the expectations of your audience and why they're there. You also need to know the social conditions of the time. A lot of time, who acted in plays was dependent. I mean, if you're doing a Greek play, for instance, the people who performed in it were the upper members of the society. If you're doing a Roman play, it was probably the slaves who were performing in the play. So who and why they were doing the show can be important to the original production of the show, that sort of thing. The author's commentaries, any kind of criticisms at the time, a lot of times will tell you the things that worked as well as the things that didn't work, more importantly. And so in production, you can attempt to correct things that other people saw that were failures in the original production. Yes, you can at least contemplate them and you may come up with a great solution for them. There's nothing saying that just because the original Broadway show didn't find the right solution doesn't mean you can't. Yes. So again, doing that type of historical research about the past performances and productions, you can do things, period research. Again, if you've got a play set in different periods of time, you can do period research about clothes of the time period. Even as far as, for instance, 2000 wasn't that far ago. And yet that's when, who's the guy that just died with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Who wore the ties that were the same color as his coats. What's his name? He was on the Mornings with Kathy Lee and
Regis Philbin.
Regis Philbin. Thank you. Regis Philbin had a little style statement with his ties that many people copied in 2000. So you can find periods, you can find how buildings were built, how costumes were worn, decorative things about the time period. Again, the way you wore a baseball cap, etc., may tell you a lot about the time period and all that sort of stuff. You can, and again, one of the things you can do is when you're looking for photos of daily life, do things like, look at how the way people dress to go to baseball games in the 1920s, if you're doing a play in the 1920s. Yes, I mean, break outside the mold of your play and just find out information about the period itself. Yes, of course, there's not going to be photographs from the 17th, 16th, 15th century, but they're paintings. They give you a sort of a notion of what people thought they looked like, at least, and what they had important, all that sort of stuff. And then there's very practical research, like what does the wire recorder look like? What does the refrigerator look like? What do the various elements that are on the stage look like during that time period, so that again, you may not make the exact choice, but you're making a choice based on information rather than on just imagination, because sometimes your imagination can be off by decades. What you imagine to be a 1940s refrigerator may actually be a 1960s refrigerator, and vice versa. Yes, so just be very clear. And again, always remember that just because the play is set in 1940 doesn't mean, especially, we'll talk about Death Salesman here for a second, but the house was probably brought 25 years before. So even though the play is set in the 45, 48, somewhere in there, the house was built in the 20s. Really, what you want to look at is the way houses were built in the teens, because of the type of neighborhood that Willie lives in. It's the lower middle class neighborhood. You're not going to be at the cutting edge of style. Even in the 1920s when the house was built, you probably are using ground plans from the 19-teens. Yes? Now, you're probably not using ground plans from the 1870s, right? Because you have things like refrigerators that exist when they built this house. Because that's, the refrigerator keeps breaking. You have water heaters that didn't exist in the 1870s, right? So there are some changes based on that type of information. But doing that kind of practical research will at least give you a grounding, that's your foundation, right? At least something to build on and that is secure. And again, you can make different choices. You don't have to be a strict period, especially if you're in some sort of fantasy land. You can certainly change things, alter things, but a lot of times, even in fantasy lands, they'll set them. For instance, Blade Runner had a very 40s feel to it, the hairstyles, that sort of thing. So even though the movie was set in the future, it harkened back to a day in the past, as things cycle and recycle. All right, as far as past productions are concerned, we're going to talk a little bit about Death of a Salesman here, just as a past production kind of show, to show what some of the things you're going to find when you do research on past productions. First thing you're going to find is that the Death of a Salesman had a very strong initial image. Most productions that do Death of a Salesman start with Willie Loman Down Center, except with Wetumpka Depot, with a strong downlight on them. So what does that look like? Well, there's a couple photos showing you what that would look like. Again, there's an example of the scrim that was designed by Joe Meltziner for the original Broadway production. Scrim is something that if you light the front of, it opaques. If you light behind it, it reveals, transluces. And so the beginning of the play for the original Broadway production, the Joe Meltziner design, was to light the beginning of the front of the stage, have Willie standing down center, transition into the house, then fly the scrim out, and he walks into the house. Yes, and there's an example of a black and white photo of inside the house with the boys upstairs talking. Yes, the dream light, for instance, where he's talking to Ben or talking to himself, really. There are different ways of doing that. One of the things about this more modern production here is that they have chosen to have the water heater present on stage the entire time. And if they're going to make a dramatic choice like that as a set designer, the lighting designer needs to pay homage to it. You need to light it. Because otherwise it is going to make no sense, because nobody ever goes to it in the play the way it's written. Now again, as a director, once it's there, you can use it or not use it. Yes, who's to say how many times Willie might go there at the end of every scene? He might go there to give you a little threat. Yes. Again, as you go inside the dream world, where Ben is and where Willie's head goes, there's a couple of examples of how you could do that. The very strong backlight, where you just see shadows, is a possibility. Again, if you haven't done the research, you haven't thought about it, well, now you've thought about it. Now, is that a good choice or bad choice? I don't know. It's a choice, right? The color of the next one is their important one. You can see that it's teal and blue. That's a different color than the reality light, yes, when they're in the dream state. Gobos are little pieces of tin that create patterns. And so one of the things you can look at is past productions and the color choices they made. So for instance, I wouldn't necessarily say that a blue door was a choice that I would come immediately to mind for Willy Loman. But the production there with Brian Dennehy, that blue door is very dramatic, and it helps to augment the suit. And the gobo there is very strong. Yes. Now the nice thing about that for theatrical purposes is that you don't actually have to have a window to create the gobo. It suggests a window, yes, but you don't actually have to have it there. But then the transom above is a nice little added piece to the door. Would you have thought about it if you hadn't seen it in the research? I don't know. But now you've seen the research. If you like it, keep it. If you don't, throw it away. Yes? And again, you can see the next one, the little gobos that are sort of softening the edge of the stage. Sort of just blends it out into the blackness as opposed to the stark edges of the stage. And then there's a picture of a production in the round. Again, you wouldn't necessarily think, how do we do this on the round? Well, could it be more impactful? I don't know. It's something to consider if you've never thought of it. You can turn, for instance, the Alabama Shakespeare Festival did a production on the stage where they made it in the round space, even though it's built as a proscenium space. Yes. So again, those are things that just when you flip through and just look at production photos, it takes you 5 seconds. You can show it to a director. The director can respond positively or negatively to it. Oh, I like that idea, I hate that idea, or this is a good way to go, or this is a bad way to go. And that hasn't cost you anything. You haven't had to draw anything. You haven't had to spend time researching things really. But once you have the director, you have a production meeting, and you have begun to focus on how you're going to do this, in other words, production concept, it makes it a little easier to be certain that the choices you're about to make on your research are going to be more down the right road. Yes? So having those little bits of research behind you can help you with your visual research, which again, your visual research can be anything: pictures, sketches, it can be about individual characters, can be about anything that sparks your imagination. You always want to get text-based, yes? But once you've gotten to the text, any kind of associations that you come from the text. So for instance, when we did Helvetica, there were a lot of references to ships, to boats in the play. Nothing happens on a ship or a boat, but there's just references to it, just a nautical discussion of terms throughout the play. And so when I designed the set for it, I used that as my jumping off point, and everything had this sort of, it was a dream kind of play, a lot like The Death of the Salesman, where you're in and out of different worlds, different ways. But the whole thing became this sort of rocking sea that eventually led to everything coming together and the world becoming a calm place. But it was about her discovering who she was, and she had this little teddy bear that was helping her through her hard times. But eventually she becomes a woman who has the strength to write the play that you're watching, yes? So again, associations are a great way to find things. Let's talk about reading and the parentheses, footnotes. Always read them. Again, going back to Helvetica, one of the first things it says is there is a squeaky door. And I said, the first thing the director came to me and said, I gotta have the squeaky door. And I said, the only thing you're not gonna get is a squeaky door. It's gonna be a sound cue. Yeah, we're not gonna have walls. It's a ship. It doesn't have walls. You don't have doors in ships. Otherwise the ship sinks. Yes, so again, once you start going with the concept, you have to stay with your concept. If we're not gonna have walls, then we're not gonna have doors. If we're not gonna have walls, we're not gonna have windows. Yes, so despite what the parentheses may say, certainly pay attention to them, because again, they're gonna guide you to what the director and the designer, or the author, and the original production, the way they did it. But don't be afraid to totally ignore them. Yes. But again, it can be a place to look for things. Once you get, you need to develop a plan for production. How do the scenes work? How do they link together? Is it all in one place? Crimes of the Heart, kitchen, the whole play, everything in the play, kitchen. Never moves. Does it change time of day? Sure. How are we gonna do that? Well, with lights, we'll do nighttime and all that sort of stuff. Great. It would be nice to have a window that you can see the offstage stuff about to happen. Sure, that'd be a nice little thing if we can do it, right? What do you think is, what color of the wallpaper? What is it, painted? Is it wallpaper? Is the floor linoleum? Is it wood? There's choices to be made, but it's all inside of the kitchen and it doesn't really change, yes? Lost in Yonkers, same thing. You're all inside a loft apartment over a soda shop. The whole thing happens, change the time, change the dates, it goes through the course of a year, but there's not a whole lot of changes that happen there as far as the environment is concerned. But once you get into shows like Death of a Salesman, where suddenly you're in a steakhouse, you're suddenly in an office building, you need to come up with a concept for production that tells you how you're going to transition into these scenes. So for instance, I'm going to say, because it's the lighting class, that in the bed that is the marital bed is also the bed that is the conjugal bed for the woman he has the affair with, simply because I don't want, as a set designer, I don't want to bring a bed off and on. I got a bed, which means the lighting designer has got to help me by making it look different lighting wise. Now, again, the director has to go along with that concept. If the director wants a different bed or doesn't like that idea of the conjugal bed and the marital bed being the same bed, you got to go with the director. Right? And so you have to come up with solution B. Yes, I don't know what solution B is, but in our case, our director liked that production concept, and that's why we did it. So how are you going to do the structure of the changes? How are you going to structure the action? What are the important parts of the play, and where do they need to happen? Yes, are there things that happen, somebody murdered or somebody shot? Does that need to have an off stage? Does it have an on stage? Is it stage right? Is it stage left? Is it, where on stage? How do you want to sequence things to make these things? Because again, without any plan right now, anything can happen anywhere. So find the key moments in the play, the climactic moments, and make sure those work. Design the show around those. Usually I say 3. If you can get 3 moments in a play exactly the way you envisioned it in your head, you're doing a darn good job. If you got to get it down to 1 moment where it all works together, then that's what you got to do, right? Getting a play with 10, 15 moments that are brilliant is genius, and you're not going to do that. So work on 1, go for 3. Yes, is my suggestion to you as far as how you stage things. Again, rely on other aspects. Let the sound do its work. Let the lights do their work. Let the set do its work. Let the costume do its work. Let the props do their work. There's so many things that just with a simple prop, you can have a refrigerator or something in the kitchen. You don't need anything else, right? Where else do you have a kitchen? And where else do you have a refrigerator? If you have a bunk bed, you're in a boy's bedroom. Yes. Where else? What else do you need? Now, if you're doing a hyper realistic show, sure. If that's your concept, that you're doing a hyper realism, great. Put it all in there. But the rest of it tends to be clutter. Now, if you're doing American Buffalo, where you're in a pawn shop, you may need other crap, yes? But if you're doing, most shows can handle paring down the excess, yes? And so you want to make the particular right choice with making those choices in order for the audience to be able to follow you as well as possible. Look at other plays. Find similar plays with similar notions, similar ideas. Find out what they look like. How do they attack their play? What are windows a big thing in your play, or is there something that's particularly cogent about the play? Are books important to the play? Or again, in craft glass tape, it's tapes. So it seems to me having tapes piled up all over the place would be great. Yes. Figure out if there are things about the psychological nature of the character that allows you to enlarge or reduce. Is this person bigger than their life, or are they smaller than their life? Yes? Kings and queens tend to be big. Peons, Death of Willy Loman, tends to be little. That's the whole problem, is that they want to be big, but they're little bitty. So having the environment be large and imposing is important, yes? To make him feel small. Find games, rituals, things that, just play around. Do some silly stuff. Imagine, because even though it may not be the right answer, it may lead to the right answer. Psychologically, as best you can analyze the character psychologically, happy people are happy people. Sad people are sad people. Sometimes people that look happy are sad. Sometimes you always want to make interesting choices. Don't make dull choices, right? You're only doing one show. Make it as interesting as you can, right? Keep making the interesting choices. And again, rely on your fellow designers and your collaboration and all that sort of stuff. Visually, again, I cannot express to you how important developing a visual sense is, because plays are watched. You watch a play. Plays, I know, have a literate side, and if you're reading the play, that's where you get into that. But when you're watching a play, it is visual. Everything, all the information is visual. Even if the person is talking, it's still visually centered in your brain. So you have to learn to speak a visual language, learn to draw, learn to present your ideas through drawing. Again, creating montages, pieces of work that are not necessarily grounded, color responses, yes, aren't necessarily grounded in any one part of the play. It's just your overall sense of the dynamics of the play, you know, how soft, how hard-edged, how, you know, what strikes you as a visual image to this play that can then lead to an interpretive choice of the play. Yes, I told you it's gonna get a little bit more esoteric toward the end. Yes, now, here's my big warning. And some of you have heard this story before. It's absolute truth. But we were doing a production of Guys and Dolls, which doesn't sound to be that difficult. Guys and Dolls is a musical about guys and dolls, not tough. Anyway, we were doing the play, and in the last scene of the play, the couple, Nathan Detroit, finally gets cornered and he has to get married. And so there's this character, Harry the Horse, that says that he needs to go get a KWYSANTIUM. KWYSANTIUM. And the director said that she had looked it up, and that word, KWYSANTIUM, I don't know this is true, I just know that she told us this, was the Romanian word for window shade. And so she said that this character, Harry the Horse, was going to go get a window shade as a wedding present for Nathan Detroit because he had this newsstand. So we're looking at the prop masters writing down window shade, wedding present, all this sort of stuff. Costume designer writing Romanian, you know, just to have a Romanian accent to his character and all that sort of stuff. We get to the first read through, and the director says to Harry the Horse, who fortunately for everyone involved had played Harry the Horse before, said, "Hey, did you realize your character is Romanian?" And he says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Will you say this word?" He says, and of course that is the Romanian word for window shade. At which point Harry the Horse, the character playing Harry the Horse, says, he's from Brooklyn. He doesn't know how to say chrysanthemum. They're going to a wedding. He needs a... So of course the prop person scratches out window shade, writes chrysanthemum. Costume designer, Romanian? No, not Romanian. We didn't have to, we were put in our place. Even though we had done all this research and did all this stuff to know all the things we could possibly know about this show, Harry the Horse was right. Sometimes the answer is there's simple answers. A person couldn't say chrysanthemum, so he says quisantium. Yes. So again, just because you've done all this research doesn't necessarily mean you know all that and a bag of chips. Yes. All right. So you're going to get assigned a research project. That'll be due next week. So make sure if you have any questions, just give me a call. But it can be visual, it can all be visual. You don't have to write anything. Now, if you're doing the history of the playwright, of course, you probably need to give me a little written part of what's going on. You don't have to worry about bibliographies or any of that sort of stuff. I know you got it online, yes? But the research project is due next week. Cool, we'll see you then. Thanks.